Hi, in this tutorial I want to go over a quick kind of overview of CSS rules, kind of how things work, um, and where things go in the code. CSS is a relatively simple language to learn, yet it could be fairly complex because there's a lot of properties, a lot of different ways to write different values and different ways of selecting things. It can make even such a simple language pretty complex. So the first thing to really cover is how to select. Now we've already written in the first few tutorials, we've already written some CSS, very little CSS, but we did write it nonetheless. Now to fully describe it, when you have a word kind of like just a word like this, where there's nothing in front of it, so like no dot, no like hash sign, um, it's going to select a tag. So in this case, this header right here selects this tag right here. Now, let's say you had one that said div. Well, that's going to select all the divs that are right in here. Same thing goes for maybe all the LIs. So this would select all the LIs in here. So as a quick example, let's make all the LIs a background of red, just so you can see it. Now you can see that we used li for these, and we also use lis for here, so this right here is affecting it. Now, um, if I put the word header in front, it's actually going to do the same thing since both these lis are within the header tag. But what if I go in here and I say put a dot hat in here? That's going to select a header, the class of hat, because there's a dot in front of it, and then it's going to look for all the LIs, which is right here. And now this should make it so only these are selected. And I don't think I saved correctly. Yeah, these are now only selected. Now, I touched on this, but the dots right here says that this is a class. So it's looking for anything with the class of this. Now, let's say you put a pound sign. This is now going to do nothing. The reason why is because this is looking for an ID of hat. Where this comes into play is where you're trying to customize something that has an ID. So a good example of this would be the logo. And we have, let's say, logo, and we're going to make the background red. And this is what we're getting right here because we have this ID equals. And you can see that it made uh, the logo red. You can actually see it right in here. So that's great. So that kind of covers how you select things and how you call things with tags, classes, and IDs. Remember, tags don't have anything. It's just simply the word of whatever the tag is called, the dot, and then whatever the class is, and then the hash for the ID. And you just kind of have to remember those. Now, some terminology is properties and values. This right here is a property, and this right here is a value. Um, there's it seems to be an endless amount of properties. There's font size, color, padding, margin, etc. And really each property in CSS has its own qualities, and each one you can spend a lot of time talking about. So we're not going to go too in depth in talking about the different properties. And values, there's also many different types of values. There's many ways of doing the same thing. For example, instead of pixels, you can do PC. You can also do EM. Uh, you can do a percentage. And each one has a different way of doing things. And um, each one really can go over and research each one individually. The next thing would be a space versus no space. And the third thing would be the comma. It's kind of in the same boat. Um, let's say you have no space. An example would be this one right here. So let's actually rewrite this, and we're gonna go UL, and we're gonna call actually a different one. Let's do a navigation bar. We're gonna do nav, since that is the title or the tag, and we're gonna call this navbar, like that. Now what this is calling is it's saying all the navs with a class of navbar. And let's change this to a different color. You can see that it selects this whole navigation bar. Now, sometimes you have the opportunity of selecting multiple classes, and I guess a good example would be this. So let's say you want to select multiple classes like this. The way you would do this is you would simply put a dot in front of everything, and since they're part of the same element, they don't have any spaces. So you can see that now I have only this right here is being selected. Now let's say I removed one of these. I should remove this right in here. You can see that it didn't, it's still selected since these both have two of these classes that are right in here. But now let's say I change this to left, something that's not in here, because this is right. This now will not select, and the reason why is because we're now calling something that's very, very precise that's not in here. Now, if you notice right here, there's a space versus no space. This space actually doesn't matter. If it's after the selection, it doesn't matter whatsoever. Now, where the spaces come in handy is, let's say you go like this. This would now look for a class beneath this one, underneath it. So within an element called this, it's looking for all the classes with the class pull left. I hope that makes sense. Now, when there's only a space, it's looking for something below it. It doesn't matter where it's below it. But there are opportunities sometimes where maybe you want to like select only the one directly below it. And unfortunately, we don't really, well, I guess we do. We can call like a div, because let's say we have, I don't know, we can call it header, and we want to select only the divs, so right here, directly below it. We can use this arrow, and it's only a single arrow, which means we're going to get all the direct children, meaning that this div will only be affected right here. So to explain it, just show it, you can see this whole thing is actually outlined. So it's a little hard to show, but really what's happening is that if you look in the inspect element, we have our header, and then we have the div right below it. See how now it's taking an effect? But it doesn't affect ones below that. See how it's no longer in the styles. So if you ever need to select something that's only the child of it and not below it, you can do that. Where that really does come in handy would be in navigation bars where you have drop downs, where you have like a UL and then an LI and then another UL and then another UI. Because sometimes you only want to select maybe the first one, or sometimes you only want to select the second one. And there's various ways of doing this and overriding other things, but this is a nice little way of um, controlling what you're selecting. Uh, Now, another option is selecting many tags all at once. Let's say you want to select everything underneath it. You can do a star. So let's say you want to select every element on the entire page on your HTML sheet and do this. So we're going to call this background red. So now it's going to make everything red. And the reason why I made everything red is because it literally affects everything. You can see right here. It affects this tag. It affects this tag. It affects the body. It affects the HTML up on the top. Literally everything. And this is used a lot. Bootstrap actually uses it to make your box sizing a border box, which is a thing that makes things a little bit nicer for you, and Bootstrap does it. But it is something you can kind of play around with. I very rarely use the stars, but they are a nice thing to touch on how things work. The next thing that I would like to say, and this is where I would like to conclude this tutorial, is hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy of CSS is really important. You have a lot of reasons to overwrite other CSS that might be written. And basically what happens is you're looking for whatever comes after, generally. So, for example, now this is a weird example because it's right after, but typically this is going to happen if you need to overwrite like a global one for a specific class, whatever it might be. Or maybe you're building a child theme on top of a parent theme, and that child theme has to overwrite certain styles. So then that way you don't have to mess with someone else's source code and you can update it in the future. But let's say you have this. I'm going to make it ridiculously big with a 600 pixels. And you can see that this now takes an effect. Now if you go in here, you can see that because this came after it, this one takes an effect. Now there's a few things to consider when you're doing this. Is what if you can only edit one that comes before? A lot of times maybe the child theme wasn't done correctly, or the parent theme isn't done correctly, and you have to work with some HTML or some CSS that is above it. The way you can kind of make it so this one takes an effect is making it more precise. I like to put HTML, sometimes HTML body, or maybe another class. And you can see even though this one comes after it and this one comes before, the one before, because it's more precise, happens to be like it takes precedence. Now if I make these the same again, of course it's going to be now big again. Now that's the way I definitely recommend to do it. One of the trouble things and something to look out for, and I consider it to be very bad practice, is the important. And it's good to understand really what it does. Is let's say you have this, and clearly this has to work, and see maybe you can't figure something out. As a last resort, you can actually use an important, and the important will then override everything else and make that now the most important thing given by its word. And that's a exclamation point and then important. Now, let's say you want to overwrite an important. Now it's going to use the selectors, and now it's going to look at whatever one is the most important. So this can cause some issues because if the theme you're working with has an important in there, now all of a sudden you're going to run into a lot of issues with overwriting that style down the line if you have multiple different styles maybe conflicting, or you need to overwrite it for some reason in a very specific section. You now can't. You want to build your CSS that it can be written on top of, and your CSS can really work with everything. So I strongly recommend not using importance, but it is a last resort, and it is good to understand for when you see it in other people's code. Now, as far as hierarchy goes, where the code comes into play also matters about where it's defined in your HTML. So this means that the main CSS, because it's loaded after normalize, this will overwrite everything in your normalized CSS. So it doesn't matter just on where it's loaded in that individual page, but also globally in your HTML. Wherever it's called, it's what it's accessed first. So this is kind of a quick overview of CSS. Obviously, I didn't touch on everything. There's almost an endless amount of properties, different types of values, and different ways of doing things. There's also many other ways of selecting different elements. There's like this tilde thing that's used for something, and various other things. So feel free to do some research and kind of play around with it. But as long as you understand kind of the IDs, the classes, and the tags and how to select them, you'll be very proficient. You'll be able to read a lot of what's going on. Anyway, this concludes this tutorial, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Talk to you guys soon.